A good horror movie kill often comes with a very good setup. Now, unfortunately, that setup tends to telegraph the fact that this person has just had a bloody countdown clock placed over their head. Make sure that you check out the original article written by Paulo Carlos over on whatculture.com. I am Sean Ferrick for What Culture Horror, and here are 10 more exact moments we knew horror movie characters were doomed. Number 10, Miss Luton, Final Destination. Miss Val Luton was one of the survivors of Flight 180 in the original Final Destination. A teacher at Mount Abraham High School, she develops survivor's guilt for leaving the plane and at the same time blames protagonist Alex Browning for the accident. In the middle of the film, she reports Alex to the FBI after she sees him sneaking into her home. But she'll eventually regret this decision, however, as Browning was there to save her, as Luton is next on death list. She washes a hot mug in cold water, which causes it to crack. She then pours vodka, but due to the crack, the alcohol starts spilling all over her house. Eventually, she sets her drink on top of the computer monitor. Keen audiences then immediately realise that Miss Luton has set the pieces that will lead to her death sequence. And wouldn't you know it, the computer explodes and sends shrapnel flying into her neck. As she starts bleeding all over her home, the blast also ignites the alcohol, causing a huge fire that engulfs everything around her. As she bleeds to death, she tries in vain to grab a cloth, only for it to drag a knife that stabs her in the chest. Number 9. Joey doesn't learn his lesson. A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. Joey Crussell was one of the survivors in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. As part of the titular group, he was temporarily a mute teenager who had a crush on local nurse. Freddy Krueger exploited this by appearing as the nurse during Joey's nightmare, luring him, then placing him in a coma. Thankfully, Nancy Thompson and the rest of the Dream Warriors would rescue Crussell and save the day. In the next movie, A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, Freddy would return and exact his revenge on the group of teens. First, he takes down Kincaid, then goes after Joey next. He appears as a naked woman inside the young man's waterbed and entrances him. Not learning his lesson from before, a gullible Joey leans in toward the girl. It's at this moment that we know that Joey might not be so lucky this time round. And true to form, Freddy Krueger bursts from the bed and kills the boy. Joey's mother then finds her son dead inside the waterbed. Number 8. Rory breaks quarantine. Life. Life is the 2017 sci-fi horror film where a crew of an international space station discovers an extraterrestrial named Calvin. But true to the genre, the creature is not what it seems and picks the cast off one by one. The decoy protagonist of the film is Rory, played by Ryan Reynolds. With the most amount of screen time during the first act and the actor's star power, audiences assume he'll be a key player in the movie. But the character's one big mistake eventually guarantee that he won't be surviving the film. You see, in an attempt to rescue fellow scientist Hugh, Rory breaks quarantine and enters the area where Calvin is lurking. Not only that, but he enters the space without a helmet or any form of protective gear. With a reckless act like that, audiences realise that Rory has set himself up for his own death scene. He tries to combat the alien with a flamethrower, but fails to do damage. Running out of fuel, he dies when the creature enters his mouth, killing him on the inside. Calvin then uses the fire vent caused by Rory as a means of escape. Number 7. Thorne incriminates himself, The Omen. Robert Thorne is the protagonist of The Omen. An American diplomat, he and his wife Kathy raised their son Damien, but soon realised the boy isn't who he seems. Though Thorne himself was aware that the child wasn't theirs, he had not counted on finding out the child was the living embodiment of the Antichrist. Despite warnings from different people, Robert is understandably skeptical to believe his son is the heir of Satan. But as more and more people, including Kathy, are killed in freak accidents, our protagonist eventually accepts the hard truth. In the film's climax, he drives Damien to church in an attempt to get rid of the evil child once and for all. This is because the only way to kill the Antichrist is through a sacred dagger on hollowed ground. But his erratic driving draws the attention of the police, who chase after the diplomat's vehicle. As the cops attempt to stop Thorne in the church, we realise that the character has sealed his fate, as no rational human would understand what he's about to do. True enough, they gun down Robert upon seeing him attempt to stab a seemingly harmless little boy. Number 6. Chucky wastes time, Child's Play 2. This time round, we're tackling a horror villain with Charles Lee Ray, aka Chucky, who returned in the 1990 sequel Child's Play 2. With a newly rebuilt body, the killer doll resumes terrorising Andy Barclay as he attempts to possess his body once again. The problem with Chucky, however, is his inability to set his priorities straight when it comes to bite him hard in the film's third act. You see, throughout Child's Play 2, Chucky spends most of the running time doing unnecessary things, despite knowing that he doesn't have a lot of time before he gets permanently stuck in his doll doll form. He makes an effort to hide another doll's body and buries it, vandalizes Andy's homework, and murders people unrelated to his plan. So, by the film's climax, where he finally has Andy where he wants him, Chucky performs the voodoo ritual to swap bodies with the boy. While he thinks this might finally work, the audiences really know that Chucky blew his chance by wasting his time throughout the movie. And true enough, he gets a nosebleed and realises he was trapped in the doll for too long. This gives Andy and his foster sister Kyle the chance to combat Chucky and kill him again. Number 5. Corey comes at the king and misses. Halloween Ends. Corey Cunningham is the divisive character introduced in Halloween Ends and serves as the main antagonist for a huge chunk of the film. A babysitter who accidentally caused the death of a child, he becomes a town pariah and later crosses paths with none other than Michael Myers. He then becomes an avatar of evil, learning to kill like Michael as the two start their own killing spree. But Corey bites off more than he can chew when he becomes drunk with power. In a scene that ensures his final fate, he ambushes Michael in his sewer hideout and forcibly takes his mask off him so he can be the shape himself. But with this being the finale of David Gordon Green's Halloween trilogy, Michael has to play a huge part in the climax, and so we know that he'll be back for revenge, and that by angering the killer, Corey has screwed himself over. By the film's climax, Corey stabs himself in the neck to try and frame Laurie Strode for his murder. When Myers arrives at the scene, the dying young man tries to stop him, but has his neck snapped in retaliation. Number 4. Agent Strom doesn't heed the warning. Saw 5. Agent Strom is the main protagonist of Saw 5. A disgraced FBI agent, he goes on a journey to prove that Detective Mark Hoffman is the next Jigsaw killer. At the beginning of the film, our protagonist seems to be doing well, performing an improvised tracheotomy during the water box trap, but by the end of Saw 5, he seems to lose all of his wits. Strom plays a tape meant for him, but stops it shortly when he confronts Hoffman and traps him in a glass coffin. This proved unwise, because longtime fans of the series know you have to listen and abide by Jigsaw's instructions in order to live. Instead, the former agent gloats about his victory, thinking he's finally caught the killer. But then the room locks Strom inside and the walls start closing in. Our hero only then plays the tape and finds out that the glass coffin was meant to keep him safe, and by placing someone else in it, he has basically signed his own death warrant. Despite efforts of escaping, Agent Strom's situation is dire as he is slowly crushed to death by the walls. Ultimately, the character was outwitted by Hoffman and lost his life in one of the most gruesome deaths in the Saw franchise, which is really saying something. Number 3. Micah mocks the ghost, Paranormal Activity. Micah is one of the primary characters in Paranormal Activity. The boyfriend of lead Katie, he initially does not believe her claims of supernatural shenanigans and for most of the running time is skeptical of the hauntings occurring in the house. He spends the majority of the film doing the opposite of handling the situation and even making things worse. He'd rather capture the activity on tape rather than attend to Katie's needs, promises not to buy a Ouija board and then overrides this by borrowing one, and actively provokes the demon to do its worst. Finally, he takes his girlfriend's crucifix and throws it into the fireplace, an action that finally cements how dumb he is and how he has screwed himself and Katie over. And so by the time he does this, horror aficionados are already expecting that the couple won't be making it, mostly due to Micah's stupidity. And though he does eventually learn to take the situation seriously for Katie, it's far too late. By the end of Paranormal Activity, the demonic entity takes over the young woman completely as it kills Micah. Number 2. Dewey Goes for the Head, Scream 2022. Dewey Riley seemed to have luck on his side for most of the Scream series. He was stabbed in the original, nearly killed in the sequel, and survived countless encounters with the different versions of Ghostface. But by the time of the requel, Scream, which came out in 2022, it seemed that things would be different. After all, the main trio, Sidney, Gale and Dewey, had survived 4 films previously, and so keeping all 3 alive would cheapen the stakes. And so sadly, Dewey was chosen for the chopping block. He rescues Tara Carpenter from the masked killer during the hospital sequence. It's a tense fight, but Dewey manages to defeat Ghostface and even shoot him. But in a moment of escape, he decides to go back and finish the menace for good, telling Sam that he's going to go for the head. From then on, audiences already know what's about to happen. And wouldn't you know it, before he can shoot the killer, his phone rings, which gives Ghostface the element of surprise as he guts Dewey like a fish. Number 1. Ripley's Facehugger, Alien 3. Alien 3 serves as Ellen Ripley's final encounter with the xenomorph threat, and despite surviving the 2 previous films, the opening immediately informs audiences that our heroine won't be so lucky this time around. The movie starts off inside the Sulaco as a facehugger latches onto an unknown victim. This causes a fire that forces the ship's computer to place our characters inside an emergency escape vehicle, EEV, and launches them into Fiorina 161. The escape goes badly as Bishop ends up being heavily damaged, Hicks is crushed by an emergency beam, and Newt drowns in her own cryotube. As for Ripley, we know that a facehugger latched onto someone during that opening. With Hicks and Newt both being dead, our final girl is the only probable host of the alien, something she doesn't find out until the middle of the film. But for us fans, we slowly start to accept that Ripley's days are numbered throughout Alien 3's running time. By the end of the film, Weyland-Yutani arrives to collect the creature inside her. In a final act of defiance, Ripley throws herself off the planet's furnaces and eliminates the alien threat for good, or at least until the next sequel. That is everything for our list. Thank you so much for listening along. You are awesome and you are wonderful. Are there any characters that you reckon we missed? Don't forget to check out our first list on the exact moments we knew horror movie characters were doomed as well. I have been Sean Ferrick for What Culture Horror. You can follow us over on Twitter at What Culture Horror, and you can follow myself at Sean Ferrick. Until I'm talking to you again, make sure you look after yourself, make sure you sleep with the lights on, and remember, just because you make a mistake or two doesn't mean you're doomed, right?